Welcome back to Fruitful Living. I'm so glad you're here with me today. We're continuing our Shadows of the Soul series, and today we're talking about something that might feel a little uncomfortable, especially if you're someone who prides yourself on being nice. We're diving into the sin of people pleasing. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Wait, isn't being agreeable a good thing? Isn't keeping the peace with our friends and family what we're supposed to do? And that's exactly why we need to talk about it. Because we've convinced ourselves that people pleasing is kindness, when really it's often just fear dressed up in a smile. Today, we're going to uncover the motivation behind people pleasing, how it affects our relationships, and our walk with God. And most importantly, how we can shine light on this shadow in our soul. Here's the thing about people pleasing. It feels so honorable, doesn't it? We tell ourselves we're being kind. We're being flexible. We're being Christ-like. We're keeping the peace. But if we're honest, and that's again what we're here to practice, we usually are terrified of conflict. Think about it. You're in a conversation where the group is gossiping or moving towards a decision that you know is wrong. Instead of speaking up, you nod along or offer supportive comments. Why? Because the weight of their potential disapproval feels heavier than the weight of your own conviction. Or if you're at home and someone asks you to take on another commitment or favor, your soul is already exhausted. Your schedule is already full. But you say yes anyway. Not out of love or calling, but because you're afraid of the conflict. You're afraid of the shadow of being disliked if you say no. We will frame it around being kind or keeping the peace, but it's actually a form of clutching for human validation to feel secure. And here's the problem. When we live for the approval of people, we can't fully live for the approval of God. I would say yes to everything. I wanted to be the agreeable one. I didn't want to rock the boat. I thought I was being a good friend, a good employee. I was trying to be loving and be responsible and be good. But really, I was just terrified of being disliked. I was terrified of conflict. I was terrified of disappointing anyone. So I twisted myself into whatever shape I thought people wanted me to be. I said yes when I meant no. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. I went along with things I didn't agree with because I didn't want to be the difficult one. And you know what happened? I lost myself. I didn't know what I actually believed, what I actually wanted, or who I actually was, because I'd spent so long being whoever I thought people needed me to be. I got exhausted and resentful and bitter. I was angry at people for making me do things. but they weren't making me do anything. I was choosing their approval over my own integrity. I was choosing their comfort over God's calling. Let's get into the word. In Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, Paul writes, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." Paul is writing to the Galatian church because false teachers have come in and twisted the gospel. They're saying that to be true Christians, you have to follow all the Jewish laws and customs, and some people are starting to believe them because they want to fit in. They want to be accepted. But Paul is defending the true gospel, salvation by grace through faith alone. And he's making it clear. He's not preaching to win a popularity contest. He's preaching the truth, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs him. Every time we stay silent about our faith, our convictions, or the truth because we're afraid of what people will think, we're choosing man's approval over God's. We're saying, I'd rather be liked than be faithful. Proverbs 29:25. The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. Proverbs is a book of wisdom, practical, lived out truth for navigating life. And this proverb is a warning. The fear of man is a trap. It's a snare. It catches you and holds you captive. When you live in fear of what people think, you're not free. You're constantly second guessing yourself, editing yourself, performing for an audience that will never be fully satisfied. But when you trust in the Lord, when you anchor your identity and security in Him, you're safe. You're free. People pleasing is a trap that keeps us from the freedom Christ offers. It keeps us performing instead of resting. It keeps us anxious instead of peaceful. It keeps us enslaved to the opinions of others instead of walking in the freedom of God's love. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, Paul writes, "But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God, who tests our hearts." Paul is writing defending his ministry. People have accused him of being a people pleaser, a flatterer, and someone who preaches for personal gain. And Paul is saying, no, I've been approved by God. I've been entrusted with the gospel, and I'm accountable to Him, not to you. He's not saying he doesn't care about people. He's saying he cares more about pleasing God than pleasing people, because God is the one who tests our hearts. God is the one who sees our true motives. We've been entrusted with the gospel too. We've been called to live as witnesses of Christ. And that means we have to care more about God's approval than people's approval. We have to be willing to speak the truth in love, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs us. Does this sound familiar? Someone asks you to volunteer, to help with a project, or to take on another responsibility. You're already overwhelmed. You're already stretched thin, but you say yes anyway. You're afraid of being seen as selfish or unhelpful. You're afraid of disappointing them. So you sacrifice your own well-being, your family's needs, and even God's calling on your life to avoid their disapproval. But here's the truth. Saying yes to everything means saying no to the things God has actually called you to do. And that's not faithfulness. That's fear. Maybe there's a conflict in your family or at work. You can see the problem. You know what needs to be said. But you smooth it over. You make excuses. You keep the peace, even if it means allowing the dysfunction. You're not keeping the peace. You're avoiding the discomfort of truth. Real peace comes from addressing issues with love, not sweeping them under the rug. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword." Sometimes love requires confrontation. Sometimes faithfulness requires conflict. You're struggling, you're hurting, you need help, but you don't ask for it. You don't share your struggle. You don't want to be a burden. You don't want people to think you're weak or needy. You're trying to manage how people see you. You're trying to maintain the image of having it all together. But Galatians 6:2 says, "Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." When you refuse to let people help you, you're robbing them of the opportunity to love you. And you're robbing yourself of the community God designed you to need. We're not trying to be deceptive, but we're trying to be liked. We're trying to keep the peace. We're trying to avoid conflict. But we need to understand that people-pleasing doesn't protect us. It imprisons us. It keeps us from real intimacy. It keeps us from being fully known and fully loved. It keeps us performing instead of resting. And it keeps us from God. Because when we're living for the approval of people, we can't fully live for the approval of God. Let's go back to Galatians chapter 1, verse 10. Paul says, "If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." Notice he says still. Paul used to be a people pleaser. He used to care deeply about his reputation, his status, his standing in the religious community. He was a Pharisee, doing everything right on the outside to win approval. But when he met Christ, everything changed. He stopped living for the approval of the religious elite and started living for the approval of God alone. And it cost him. He was rejected, persecuted, imprisoned, but he was free. The same is true for us. When we stop living for the approval of people and start living for the approval of God, we might lose some things. We might lose some relationships. We might lose some opportunities. We might lose some comfort. But we gain freedom. We gain authenticity. We gain peace. We gain the joy of knowing we're living in obedience to the one who matters most. The goal isn't to become harsh or unkind or uncaring to people. The goal is to love people from a place of security in God, not from a place of desperation for their approval. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 says, "Whatever you do, work heartily, as for the Lord and not for men." When you live for an audience of one, you're free to love people without needing anything from them. Look at these people-pleasing moments, the yeses when you mean no, the constant need for validation, not as a personality quirk, but as a shadow that needs the light of the world. You don't have to live under the weight of everyone's approval. You can step out of the shadow and into the freedom of God's love. You can be honest. You can set boundaries. You can trust God with the outcome. Remember, the goal isn't perfection. It's awareness. It's letting the Holy Spirit show you the way. Thank you for being vulnerable with me today. Thank you for letting me share my heart and my struggles. Keep watch over your heart. Live for an audience of one. And I'll see you in the next episode. Stay fruitful.